Countdown to Halloween 2023, featuring eerie and uncanny tales of haunts, ghosts, and suspense. October is finally here. Join us all month for special Halloween presentations on Storylink Radio's YouTube channel as we count down to Halloween 2023. Keep a close eye on YouTube alerts or you'll miss one. Celebrate October with us right here and now. Tonight's presentation from Storylink Radio. The Storm. Clay Davis opened the map.
Yeah, I think we missed the turnoff, Dad.
He looked up at a sign as they zipped past.
I think we should have gotten off about a mile back.
Clay's mother turned from the front passenger seat and pointed to the map.
May I see that, please?
Clay refolded the map and handed it to her. She studied the map for a moment in the failing afternoon light.
Oh, he's right,
she said finally.
Oh, great,
Jessica, Clay's older sister, groaned. She looked out at the gray, leaden sky as raindrops began to splat against the windshield.
Now we're never going to get there. Who picked this old inn in the middle of the boondocks anyway?
You did, everyone chimed in.
Oh, yeah, right.
Jessica grinned sheepishly.
Well, I thought it'd be romantic. It's almost a century old.
Yeah, Clay said,
and if we don't get there soon, we'll be a century old.
Don't worry, their dad said as he maneuvered the van into the right lane. We'll take the next exit and then we'll double back. So more than an hour later, after several wrong turns and some rough roads, Mr. Davis guided the family over a rickety bridge across a rain-swollen stream. Through the trees, a small village came into view. In the drizzling rain and the gathering darkness, the scene looked eerie and uninviting.
I don't know, that sounds kind of cool.
The stores lining Main Street were all closed. The village appeared forsaken. Jessica was the first to say what everyone else was thinking.
Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. That Traveler's Rest motel back on the expressway didn't look so bad. Maybe we should stay there.
I'm afraid we don't have a choice now. Mr. Davis looked down at the glow of the gauges on the dash. We don't have much gas left, and it looks as though that closed gas station over there is the only one in town. Besides, I don't think it'd be smart to drive around anymore on these back roads in this rain. Let's just try to find the inn, and we'll stay there for tonight, okay? If we don't like it, we can leave in the morning. The rain pelted the windshield. No one spoke as Mr. Davis inched the van down the empty, dismal Main Street. Young Clay had the strange feeling the village wasn't deserted at all. He squinted out in the gloom of nightfall, certain that someone out there was watching them pass. The cold chill made him shiver. Me too, Rick.
You know what it means when you shiver?
Jessica said.
It means that someone in the future has just walked across your grave.
Clay elbowed her playfully.
No, it doesn't. It means...
Hey, look, there's a light, Mrs. Davis interrupted.
That must be it.
Through the heavy rain, they could see a dim glow a few hundred yards up the hillside. Mr. Davis turned at the next corner and headed up the slick hill, then parked. A sudden flash of lightning crackled across the sky, and for a moment the landscape was bathed in a ghostly light. An old Victorian building was hunched against the forested hillside. Dense clumps of trees and bushes seemed to be pressing in and around the inn, as if they were trying to push it from its unsteady perch. Mrs. Davis took a deep breath.
Well, there's no sense sitting out here in the rain. Let's make a run for it.
Clay slipped his arms through the straps of his backpack.
Last one in's a drowned rat, he yelled,
slamming the door behind him and running through the pelting rain toward the lighted porch. Laughing, he clambered up the wooden steps under the shelter of the overhang. When he turned to watch the rest of the family struggle across the muddy path, something at the corner of the building caught his eye. A figure, a girl perhaps, slipped from the edge of the porch into the darkness. But, well, that was impossible. Who or what would go out into such a storm? Still, something about what he had seen seemed oddly familiar to Clay. Suddenly he became aware of his dad behind him holding open the door to the inn. Come on, son. There's no time here to daydream. Clay moved toward the door, taking one last look over his shoulder. Shrugging, he stepped inside and was a little startled by the light. The entry hall was warm and cheerful, not what he expected, not what Rick was hoping for. A pleasant, gray-haired woman in a crisp flowered dress greeted them.
Oh, good heavens. This is not any sort of night out for anyone to be traveling in. Come in, come in. There's a warm fire in the parlor. I'm Mrs. Reese. Ellen. Welcome to Dark Acres Inn. I'm afraid we didn't think you were going to make it tonight, so I don't have dinner prepared. But I can put together a warm snack in no time.
Hey, a snack sounds great, said Mrs. Davis.
But could we go to our rooms first and change out of these damp clothes? Oh, gracious, yes. I did prepare rooms just in case. 3, right? My husband will get you settled. Albert!
She called out quietly.
Our guests have arrived.
Albert, a tall, kind-faced man with a head of thick white hair, sauntered in and helped the Davises with their bags.
Do you have a granddaughter?
Clay asked Ellen. And the man tilted his head. No, son, what makes you ask that? Clay motioned toward the door.
Well, when I was outside, I thought I saw someone step off the porch. I thought maybe it was your granddaughter or something.
The two older people glanced at each other quickly. Clay noticed Mrs. Reese nervously fingering the lacy collar of her dress.
Oh, yes, well, sometimes the lightning can play tricks on you. It can make you think you see things that aren't there, right?
Mr. Reese picked up some luggage. No, it wouldn't be hospitable for us to let you catch cold, huh? Just follow me and we'll get you all set. He guided them along the hallway and opened the doors to 3 rooms. If you don't like these, you can take your pick of the rest. There's no one else here. These rooms will be fine, said Mr. Davis. We'll join you and your wife in the parlor shortly. Once Clay was alone, he dropped his backpack onto a chair and unzipped it. He pulled out a dry sweatshirt, jeans, sneakers, and socks. But he didn't change right away. Instead, he clicked off the light and stood at the window, staring out into the night. Outside, tree branches tossed violently in the rising wind. Lightning flashed. Huh. No one could be out there on a night like this, Clay whispered to himself.
Threat has been detected.
Oh, look, a threat's been detected. Was helpful, huh? And then he switched the light back on and quickly changed clothes. But when he looked into the mirror to comb his damp hair, he froze. In the reflection, he could see the window behind him. The sad eyes of a pale young girl gazed steadily in at him from outside. Slowly she raised her tiny clenched hand and began to knock on the glass. Clay dropped the comb and whirled around to face the window, but now there was nothing but a wind-whipped branch beating against the glass. Another flash of lightning lit up the empty scene, and Clay bolted out of the room and headed down to the parlor. As he reached the entryway, he slowed down. How would he explain what he had seen? He didn't want everyone to think he was just a scared little kid. Maybe it was a trick of the light. By the time he joined his family in the Reeses, Clay had almost convinced himself that nothing had happened, until he saw his sister Jessica's face. She kept glancing at the French doors, which appeared to lead to an outside terrace. Clay's dad smiled at him. What took you so long? Mr. Reese was just telling us a little about the area. There's a dam up at the top of the valley with a lake behind it. If it stops raining tomorrow, maybe we can go up there and have a picnic. Yeah, sounds great, Dad. But like Jessica, Clay couldn't stop looking at the French doors. They seemed so fragile. If there really were something outside, those doors didn't seem strong enough to keep it out. Clay accepted a sandwich and a steaming cup of hot soup from Mrs. Reese and sat by the fire near his sister. As the adults continued their conversation, he whispered to her, Did you see anything strange tonight? Wide-eyed Jessica looked back at him. No. Well, not exactly. That is, it wasn't that I saw anything, but Clay, when I was in my room, I had this spooky feeling I was being watched. I don't like this place. Did you see anything? Clay decided not to make his sister any more frightened than she was. No. It's just, weird here. Jessica's hand shook as she reached for her cup. This place is so old. Do you think it could be haunted? Her gaze flickered toward the French doors. I feel like we're not alone. Well, not as alone here as we think. After they had eaten, the family retired to their rooms. Despite the strange happenings, Clay soon fell sound asleep. But whatever was haunting his waking thoughts seemed to have found a way into his dreams as well. At first, his dream was pleasant. He was in a field near the inn on a warm summer day. He could feel the sun on his face and hear the laughter of a young girl. She began to sing a familiar song, but after a moment or two, the song turned to a kind of moan, almost like a sound of the wind. The moan rose to a cry for help. He tried to reach the girl, but the ground turned to thick mud. He was sinking in deeper and deeper until finally he couldn't breathe. All the while he could hear cries and sobbing, but they were cries of many people, people in terror. Clay sat up fully awake and gaped out the window directly into a pair of mournful eyes. Once again he saw the ashen face of the girl he'd seen earlier. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but Clay heard only the crash of thunder. Threat detected. The girl curled her fingers at the base of the window, trying to open it, and then her eyes met Clay's again. As if still in a dream, Clay felt the need to do what the strange girl wanted. He kicked away the blankets. He rose slowly and moved toward the window. The girl's eyes glittered as Clay touched the metal latch. Suddenly a bolt of lightning lit up the sky, and Clay saw that there were dozens of people outside in the storm. They were all dressed in turn-of-the-century clothes, and they were moving toward the inn as if their feet weren't quite touching the ground. A tremendous crack of thunder drowned out Clay's scream as he backed away, turned and raced into the hall. He screamed again as he crashed into his sister. She was shaking violently.
"There's something out there, Clay." "Yeah, I saw them too. We got to get Mom and Dad."
He flung open the door to his parents' room, but it was empty. Clay and Jessica ran down the hall. Relief washed over them when they saw their parents sitting in the parlor, but the relief lasted for only a moment. When Mr. Davis looked up, his face was strained. Mr. Reese was twisting the dials on a radio, but all it was receiving was static. Come on in, kids, Mr. Davis motioned to them. You might as well know what's going on. It seems that all this rain has weakened the dam. There have been reports on the radio that everyone down below has been evacuated, but the stream's flooded out the road. There's no way we can get out. He smiled to reassure them. But Mr. Reese says we're on high ground and we shouldn't be in any danger here. Mrs. Davis studied Clay's face and then Jessica's. There's something else wrong. What's the matter? Just on a side note, as Rick says, stories like this make him happy. And if you have a chance to visit the basement here in Second Life, you'll see a little cartoon strip featuring Rick at just such a storytelling as this. Clay glanced at his sister.
We saw something. People outside. They were dressed weird, like out of the history books, you know. They were all around the inn.
Mr. Reese shut the radio off. Mrs. Reese finally broke the silence.
It's them, Albert. They're here for us. You know it. What is she talking about?
Mrs. Davis demanded. Albert Reese rubbed his eyes and smoothed back his hair with both hands.
It's nothing. It's just an old story. You tell them, Albert, or I will, the old woman said.
Mr. Reese began speaking slowly. Well, you see, this isn't the first inn to stand on this site. There was another one before the flood of 1885. A fine man and his wife rented. They did. They had a little girl and a boy. Those kids were never apart. And then came the storm. It was as bad as this one, or worse, maybe. The townsfolk down below were worried about the dam. Word is they took shelter up here, but it didn't do them any good. That damn dam. Mrs. Reese walked to the fireplace. She took down a photograph from among the many on the mantelpiece. Mr. Reese continued this story. It seems that damn dam did break, and it was worse than anybody thought it would be. The water raged down this valley with a vengeance. It washed away the inn. Nobody survived. Some folks think that when the people die violently like that, they don't rest, you know. Some folks here in the valley say that when it rains, they can hear the moans of the dead on the wind. But those are good, hard-working people. I don't see why they'd want to harm anyone. You're not telling me you believe in ghosts, are you? Mr. Davis asked with surprise. Hey, I grew up around here, the old man answered. There have been times when the rain was real bad and the wind howled through the trees like... Well, I'm not one to scoff.
This is the family that owned the inn.
Mrs. Reese turned the photograph so the others could see it. It was a man and woman in turn-of-the-century clothes. Seated in front of them were a boy and a girl holding hands.
Oh, my goodness, Jessica gasped. Clay, the boy looks like you.
Clay said nothing. He stared at the face of the girl. It was the same face that had gazed in the window at him. A bolt of lightning crackled, and seconds later the thunder shook as if they're trying to pound the inn right into the ground. The lights went dead, leaving the parlor lit only by a flickering fire. A tremendous gust of wind crashed open the French doors, and the rain poured in. But no one moved to close them. Standing just beyond the entrance was something that had once been a little girl. Her dull blonde curls hung limply around her pale face. Her sodden dress was streaked with mud. A few yards away on either side of them were others who appeared to have shared her fate. The girl's eyes were locked onto Clay's as she raised her small hand and motioned for him to follow her. Without thinking, he began to walk toward the doorway.
Clay, no, no!
His mother grabbed at him, but he quickly slipped out into the downpour. The wind ripped at his clothes, the rain drenched him, but he was no longer in control. He had to go with her. Slipping and sliding in the mud, he struggled up the hillside after the phantom girl.
We've got to stop him! Clay!
His mother screamed. Come on, Mr. Reese said to Mr. Davis. We'll stop him. Two men ran out into the downpour. At that moment, the front door to the inn slammed open. Seeming to float just above the ground, several figures entered and drifted toward the parlor. Jessica shrieked,
Mom, what are they? What do they want?
In the terror that she clutched at her mother, Mrs. Davis picked up a lamp from the table and threw it at the specters, but they kept advancing. The air became thick with the smell of damp earth and mildew.
We've got to get out of here,
said Mrs. Reese, shaking with fear. She snatched a blanket from the arm of the couch and threw it around Jessica's shoulders. The two women and Jessica ran into the storm after the others. Driven by fear, they climbed higher up the slick hillside. Far above them, Clay stumbled to his knees. He tried to get up again, but he realized that something had him by the ankle. The rain had eased. The sky had begun to lighten with the approaching dawn. Clay looked down and saw that it was his father who was gripping him tightly.
No, Dad, let me go. I've got to go to her.
Suddenly, Clay heard distant thunder. At the same time, he realized the ground was shaking. The roaring grew louder as Mrs. Reese, Mrs. Davis, and Jessica scrambled up the hill. Seconds later, a raging wall of water tore through the valley below. It ripped up trees and sent boulders flying. The mud-choked waters fell upon the inn like a savage beast and ripped it to pieces, carrying away what was left. The 6 people huddled against the hillside, safe from that deluge. The phantoms stood below at the edge of the water. As the day grew brighter, they faded into the flood, one by one.
Saints preserve us,
Mrs. Reese said, holding on to her husband.
If it hadn't been for them, we would have been in that building.
Clay looked up at the fading form of the girl above him. She held out her hand and she smiled. He reached out and brushed her fingertips just before she vanished.
Thank you,
he whispered, hoping she could hear him. You've just heard tonight's story from Storylink Radio's Countdown to Halloween 2023. Remember to come back for our next tale. Many more stories of all genres available to listen to and read along with now on our website at www.storylinkradio.com. Visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Storylink Radio. And visit our podcast for easy mobile listening anywhere, anytime. Just search for Storylink Radio on your favorite podcast provider. Oh, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click that alert bell for Storylink Radio.